Good morning. We're back in the book of Daniel, and when we left off last time, we saw a death sentence had been issued by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, against all the wise men and enchanters of his kingdom. And the death sentence would be carried out against every one of them unless they could tell the king not only the meaning of his dream, but also exactly what the dream was. Even though they were exiles from Jerusalem, Daniel and his friends are under this same death sentence because they're part of the king's inner circle now. They've been brought in and initiated into the Babylonian circle of wise men. Last week, we talked about how this was an impossible task that Nebuchadnezzar gave to these men. It was something no mortal could do. It was hopeless. Even Daniel knew that. But as they come to get Daniel to take him away to be executed, Daniel asks for time, and Nebuchadnezzar grants his request. Daniel uses the extra time to pray with his friends for mercy from God. And then in the night, Daniel has the dream revealed to him by the God of heaven. When that happens, listen to what happens next. Daniel 2:24-28. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king. I'll interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, no enchanter, no magician, no diviner can explain to the king the mystery he's asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come." Now, we don't have to wonder who this revealer of mysteries is. There in verse 28, Daniel makes it very clear to us who the revealer of mysteries is. It is the God in heaven. The Babylonian gods had left the wise men empty, without any answers. But Daniel's God, our God, had the answers because our God holds the future. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." Stop now and put yourself in Nebuchadnezzar's shoes for just a moment. Think who he was. You may recall a movie a few years ago called Titanic. And there's an iconic scene in that movie where Leonardo DiCaprio's character is standing on the bow of the boat with arms outstretched saying, "I'm king of the world." DiCaprio in the movie just felt that way. Nebuchadnezzar literally was king of the world at that time. He controlled a vast empire. In his mind, as king of the world, he was the one who was moving and shaping history, building his empire. But he's about to find out that as powerful as he is, there is one who is more powerful, one whose purpose will prevail. Daniel's God, our God, is the revealer of mysteries, not just because he knows the future, but because he is moving and shaping the future to accomplish his purpose. In his dream, God is showing Nebuchadnezzar and us how he's doing that. This isn't a news flash, but none of us knows what the future holds, do we? Every time we think we have a situation in hand, we think we have things figured out, and we think we're in control over our lives, God shows us that's not the case at all. There's something we didn't foresee, something unexpected that happens that we didn't account for in our plans, and suddenly everything changes. You can even see that in the movie Titanic. One minute, DiCaprio thinks he's king of the world. The next minute, the great ship is going down. He had big plans for his life, and then suddenly, the ship hit an iceberg, and that was it. Everything changed. None of us knows what tomorrow holds. We're all just a bit like the wise men of Nebuchadnezzar's court, scratching our heads. We may think we have all the answers. We may think we have everything figured out. And then suddenly we're blindsided and everything changes and we realize we don't know anything. So let's talk about this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. Let's talk about what this dream means, not just for Nebuchadnezzar, but for us. Let me read it to you again. Daniel 2, beginning of verse 29. Here Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was and tells him the meaning. Daniel says, "Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in your bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue is made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to you, the king. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some of the strength of the iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with the clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with the baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Now, that's the dream and Daniel's interpretation of the dream. To understand it, let's start by examining this statue. What do we notice about the statue in this dream? Well, first, being a statue, what is it? It's clearly a work of man's hands. The statue is a work of man, and the rock that strikes it, though, notice what it says. It was not cut out by human hands. In other words, the rock is a work of God, the revealer of mysteries. The second thing we can observe is that this statue is the Titanic of statues. Verse 31 tells us it's enormous, it's dazzling, it's awesome in appearance. Now remember how that great ship, the Titanic, was described. It too was described as being awesome, unsinkable, but like the statue, it was a work of human hands. And because it was the work of human hands, it had a fatal flaw. We'll get to what that flaw was in a moment, but first, look at the enormous, awesome statue. Verses 37 to 38 tell us it had a head of gold. And Daniel tells us that represents the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. He's referred to even as the King of Kings. He is the great ruler of this age. Verses 37 and 38 tell us that. And the language that Daniel uses in verses 37 and 38 to describe Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is really very revealing. Think what it reveals to us about where Nebuchadnezzar's power came from. It's not something inherent in Nebuchadnezzar himself. It's from the hand of God, the God of heaven, the revealer of mysteries. Whoever you are, whatever position you find yourself in, understand this: God's the one who put you there. He didn't just raise Nebuchadnezzar up in this moment or anybody else that has ever lived. God is doing this in every person's life. Psalm 139, verse 16, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. God had a plan for Nebuchadnezzar's life before he was ever born, a plan to make him the most powerful king in the world at that time. But know this, God also had a plan for Daniel's life, even though it seems like in some ways Daniel's life's out of control, certainly out of Daniel's control. He's not where he wants to be. But God had a plan for Daniel before Daniel was born. Daniel was born to be a captive in Babylon, an exile from his homeland. But God had a purpose in that. It was so that Daniel could be there in this moment in time to exert godly influence over Nebuchadnezzar and be part of shaping future world events. A nobody captive from a tiny nation is telling the King of Kings of that time how history is going to unfold. I want you to see this. The same is true in your life. God's put you right where he wants you to be. You're not where you are by accident. He has a purpose in where he's put you. For the time being, that purpose may be simply to humble you and shape you and get you ready for whatever's next. Many of the heroes of the Bible had what you might call a wilderness experience, where it seems like years of their life are simply being wasted. Moses was 40 years in the wilderness. Joseph spent years as a slave in Egypt and then in a dungeon. But God was using those experiences to shape them, to prepare them to be influencers in the world that they live in. And whether you realize it or not, he's doing the same thing in your life. Whatever you're dealing with today, God has a purpose in that. I had my own share of wilderness experiences. I'm a very slow learner, so I had to have 3 wilderness experiences. 3 different times, in addition to my regular job, I had to get a paper route in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. to make ends meet. I had to deliver 500 newspapers 7 days a week. And you know what? A man can do a lot of thinking at 2 a.m., just folding and delivering newspapers. That thinking helped shape me and change my life. I thought about my mistakes. I thought about the future. I thought about the man I wanted to be, that I thought God wanted me to be. And I've always looked back on those times as my own wilderness experience, preparing me for what God had in store for me. Sadly, though, I was a slow learner and needed 3 of them. You might be in one of those experiences now. Trust me, it will not be a wasted experience if you give that experience to God and trust him and allow him to work through it to accomplish his purpose in your life. Maybe you're in an opposite position right now. Maybe you're like Nebuchadnezzar in a position of influence. A lot of times we don't think we are. We don't realize who we're influencing. About 10 years after Carrie graduated from college, she got a card from her best friend in college. And in that card, she told Carrie she had become a Christian, and she thanked Carrie for the influence that Carrie had been in her life. And when Carrie got that, she was like, who, me? What did I do? But Carrie had been an influence, very subtly, that made an impact that years later bore fruit. Think of the little ones in our church. We have an opportunity, every single one of us, over the next several years to influence their lives, teaching them in Sunday school, setting an example for them, teaching them in children's church or Kids Quest. Who knows what these little ones will grow up to be, who they might influence in years to come. If we just open our eyes, we'll see that all around us, God has put us in positions to be influencers just like Daniel. Because God, the revealer of mysteries, isn't simply shaping history, he's shaping each of our individual lives. In fact, it's through our lives that God's at work shaping history. Look again at the language Daniel uses in verse 38 to describe what God has done for Nebuchadnezzar. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he's made you ruler over them. You're that head of gold. Now, if you look at that language and think back to the first chapters of the book of Genesis, you'll see an amazing similarity to how Daniel describes Nebuchadnezzar and the mandate that God gave to Adam to rule over the beasts of the land and the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea. Made in the glorious image of God, Nebuchadnezzar is doing what God made all of mankind to do, what he made you and I to do. Rule over creation and subdue it. But just as God put Adam and Eve in that position of authority and then deposed them because of their sin and rebellion, God can and will do the same to Nebuchadnezzar and every other powerful kingdom after his. Because the problem is, rather than using their power to be rulers on behalf of God, they usurp that power for themselves. God raises kings up, he takes them down, and we see that in Nebuchadnezzar's dream and in verses 39 and 40. After Nebuchadnezzar, what do we see happen? His kingdom falls, and another kingdom rises, and it falls, and another kingdom rises, and it falls. Kingdoms come and kingdoms go, and it's all part of God's plan. Now, before we talk about the kingdoms that these various sections of the statue represented, notice two things about each of these sections. First, the value declines as you go from head to toe. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then iron mixed with clay. But as the value decreases, the strength increases. Silver is more durable than gold. Bronze is more durable than silver. Iron is strong. So what we have as you look at the statue is what? A vision of decreasing glory. As these kingdoms come, they're less and less glorious, but yet they're stronger and stronger as one kingdom deposes another. Each of these kingdoms, in amazing ways, will be used by God to prepare the way for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. We already talked about Babylon as the head of gold. It was indeed a glorious kingdom, as it's described here. It was a kingdom that God used and raised up for the purpose of punishing Israel. But God also raised them up for the purpose of preserving Israel. Israel was to go into captivity there and seek the good of the land they were in, and they were to increase in number, just as they did in Egypt. Why did God want that? Why did God raise Babylon up? He raised them up to punish Israel, but also to protect them, to bring them under the care of Babylon, where they could flourish and once again return back to the promised land to bring forth a Messiah. In 539 BC, another kingdom would grow stronger than Babylon and begin to rule the world. It was the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Many commentators believe that's what's represented in the silver chest, the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. God would use that kingdom for his purpose as well, to resettle Israel back in the promised land, rebuild the temple of God, preparing the way for the Messiah to come. Years later, there was a series of war between the Greeks and the Persians, and the Greeks finally defeated the Persians under Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Many commentators believe the Greek Empire is represented in the thighs of bronze. Bronze is a very, very durable metal, an alloy of copper and tin that it resists corrosion. It's an apt description of the Greek Empire. After Alexander the Great, the empire slowly diminished, but its influence didn't. Greek philosophy, Greek language were still dominant influences well into the time of Christ. That's why the New Testament in its original language is Greek. It was the common language of that day because the Greek Empire had conquered the world. After the Greek Empire, though, the Roman Empire began to rise up and exert influence, and it was a powerful empire. Some commentators believe it's represented by the iron in the legs of the statue. The Roman Empire stretched from Africa to Europe and into Asia. What role did it have to play in the coming of the Messiah? Well, first, it brought about what's known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The Roman peace wasn't anything like the peace of Christ the Bible talks about. The Roman peace was a piece of iron, an iron fist. Came through fear and intimidation, but it was important because it brought stability to the world at the time Jesus came, at the time the church began to grow. And because the Roman Empire was so vast, it developed a system of roads that went everywhere through the empire and allowed early missionaries like Paul to travel everywhere in the known world and preach the gospel and plant churches. Some commentators believe the feet and toes were a further extension of that Roman Empire as it began to diminish in power. The text only refers to 4 kingdoms, so it would seem like you go from the Babylonians to the Medes and the Persians to the Greeks, and then the last 2 sections are all part of the Roman Empire. And if you look at world history, the Roman Empire was indeed the last worldwide central government ruling over the known world. It wasn't truly worldwide, but it encompassed the known world at that time. But it couldn't stand, and we're actually told why in this vision that Nebuchadnezzar has. It was a mixture of people all seeking their own agendas. It wasn't united. Like clay and iron, those opposing agendas didn't mesh together as one. If you study the history of the Roman Empire, while there was a peace, no one would ever dare to stand against Rome. They simply couldn't do it. Rome was too powerful. Yet within Rome, there was constant infighting and power struggles that weakened it, eventually leading to its downfall. Every man-centered kingdom will suffer from this problem. Sin and sinful pride will invariably destroy an entity from the inside out because sin divides and creates chaos. Quoting Jesus at the time of the Civil War, you may remember Abraham Lincoln saying this: "A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand." Sin weakens, it divides, it destroys nations and political parties and businesses and churches and families. Now, you may have picked up the fact that as I was describing each of these sections, I said many commentators believe. I said that for a reason, because there are some differences of opinion, but the majority opinion is what I have laid out for you this morning. But the truth is, we have no idea if that's exactly the right interpretation of the dream, assigning these various kingdoms to these sections. The only one we know for certain is the head of gold, because we're told in the text it represents Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Beyond that, there is some debate about what the subsequent sections represent. And I don't think the point here really is for us to look and say that's a specific kingdom being represented there. Consider the statue again. As I pointed out earlier, it's made by the hands of men, sinful men. As kingdoms rise and fall, the glory diminishes. From gold to a mix of iron and clay. In a very real sense, the statue is not simply a vision of the decline and fall of the Babylonian Empire and its successors, but really an epitaph for human history, the direction humanity's headed in. Things aren't getting better and better. We're not evolving into something better. Things are going from good to bad to worse as sin corrupts. The entire human endeavor was gifted and blessed by God in the beginning with an unparalleled glory and dominion, and it ends up in nothing but division and dissolution. For example, it was once said of the British Empire that the sun never set on it. It was so vast, somewhere the sun was always shining on the British Empire. But it's true now, as you look at what Great Britain has become, the sun is indeed set upon it. It's greatly diminished. America was founded to be that shining city on a hill, but now the light isn't quite so bright. Who knows what God's going to do in the future? And all this could cause us to despair, because now we're talking about our country, the place where we live. But we have to remember, the revealer of mysteries is the one who's in control and shaping all of these world events for his purpose. He had a purpose in everything that happened with Daniel in Babylon, with the Medes and the Persians, with the Greeks, with the Romans. It was all to bring forth the coming of Christ at just the right moment in time. And the time we live in is all coming together for God's purpose to bring the return of the Messiah at just the right time. Stop and think for a moment, though, how much this statue must have weighed. The feet, the toes, the base of the statue, as you look at them, they're the weakest part. A mixture of iron and clay, partly strong but partly brittle. The statue literally has feet of clay. Its foundation is weak. But isn't that true of everything that's built on man's wisdom? Do you see an application here for your life? As humans, we have a tendency to try to build our own monuments in our lives, don't we? Think how hard we all work to have glorious heads, either trying to be smarter than everybody else or better looking than everybody else. It seems like we're going in one of those two directions. Think how invested we are in the glory of our own lives, but oftentimes think how we're building our lives. It's on the wisdom of the world. We have feet of clay. Whatever statues we're building are destined to crumble if they're built on the wisdom of the world. Because no matter how beautiful our lives may seem to be, they don't have a solid foundation if they're built on the wisdom of the world. Think how many years we spend trying to build our lives into something that we can pound our chest over and be proud of, and how quickly it can all fall apart and be swept away because we're building on something that isn't solid and strong. No matter how glorious and strong the rest of the statue is, when the feet go, the whole thing is destined to come crashing down. And look what it is in the dream that makes the statue crumble. The statue, as I pointed out earlier several times, was a human invention made by human hands. But the stone, Daniel makes a point of saying it was untouched by human hands. It's supernatural. Daniel 2:33, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. But there are two other things about this stone that are really amazing. First, of all the things in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the stone seems to be the least valuable of all. Less valuable than gold or iron even. And second, something amazing happens with the stone. Do you see it there in verse 35? The rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, I wasn't the best college student, but I did have biology and geology both in college. And while I didn't learn much, I did learn this much. Rocks are inorganic. They do not grow. But this one does. It grows from something small and insignificant to a mountain that fills the earth. Now think what this stone represents. There's no question what it represents. It is clearly a picture of our King Jesus coming to earth, not by human hand, but by the hand of God, and establishing a kingdom that will one day fill the entire earth. This is an amazing prophetic picture that God has given to Daniel 100 years before the rise of the Medes and the Persians, 250 years before the rise of the Greek Empire, 400 years before the rise of the Roman Empire, 600 years before the coming of Jesus. There is this prophecy pointing to God's Son being brought forth of a virgin to bring a kingdom that will fill the earth. There's only one way Daniel could have known all this, and that is through the revealer of mysteries, the one who controls the course of history. What a great description this rock is of Jesus. Listen to what Jesus said about himself from Psalm 118 as he quotes it in Matthew 21:42. Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. The religious leaders of Jesus' day looked at the stone and they rejected it. But God was placing that stone as the cornerstone. The religious leaders of Jesus' day said, there's no way this rock of a human being could be the Messiah. There's nothing special about him. He's just common. The illegitimate son of a carpenter from Galilee. They rejected him. They crucified him. But from his humble beginnings as a baby born to a peasant girl in a stall in Bethlehem, through his death and resurrection, Jesus brought down the kingdoms of this world and ushered in a new kingdom that is growing and filling the earth. Julian the Apostate was a Roman empire during that time. I think you could describe it as the clay and the iron mixed together. The Roman Empire was becoming more and more fragmented. 363 AD was the time of his death. By this time, the Roman Empire had begun to really embrace Christianity, though. But Julian is called the apostate for a reason. He sought to reinstitute the pagan religions of Rome. And he considered himself to be in a contest against Christ and Christianity. And he failed miserably. His dying words are recorded this way: "You have conquered, O Galilean." He realized he had been beaten by Jesus. Jesus conquered the Roman Empire without a sword, without a spear, but through his death and resurrection, and through his followers that loved like no one had ever loved before. It's amazing stuff. Daniel saw it all unfold 600 years before it ever began to happen, because the revealer of mysteries had shown it to him. Listen to how Jesus described the kingdom of heaven that he came to be. It's very similar to what Daniel talks about in Daniel 2. Luke 13:18-19. What is the kingdom of God like? Jesus said. What shall I compare it to? It's like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his garden. It grew and became a tree, and the birds perched in its branches. A rock grew and filled the earth. A tiny seed grew and filled the garden. From its humble beginning in Jerusalem, the church, which is the kingdom of heaven here on earth, spread, and it filled the Roman Empire. And from there it spread and filled Europe. And from there it spread and filled into America. And now today it is spreading and filling in places like Asia and Africa and South America. The humble, seemingly insignificant rock is growing into a mountain that fills the earth. How is that happening? One heart at a time. One by one, hearts are being transformed by the power of the gospel. One by one, hearts are crowning Jesus as King and Lord of their life. Jesus came the first time in weakness and humility. When he comes again, he'll come as a king with the nations as his inheritance. Psalm 2 is a psalm about Jesus written 1,000 years before Jesus would be born. It's quoted, though, in the book of Revelation and applied to Jesus there and his second coming. Listen to the words of Psalm 2, verses 1-9. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I've set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So much for that picture of gentle Jesus that so many today want us to see and only see as we look at Jesus. A Jesus that wouldn't hurt a fly. A day is coming, the Bible's very clear on this, a day is coming when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. It will either happen as a result of an iron rod being taken to the back of their legs, or as people willingly bow their knee. As Paul says will happen in Philippians 2, 9-11, God's highly exalted Jesus and bestowed on him a name that's above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. My friends, that is your King. It is not who is going to be elected this next November. It is not any other world leader living today or living at some point in the future. It is the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We are awaiting the return of our true King, who will bring a kingdom that will endure and fill the earth with the glory of our God. But we're not there yet. We're in a time the theologians describe as the now and not yet. The kingdom's come, but it's not yet here in its fullness. It's still filling the earth. The rocks come rolling down the mountain, but the mountain's still growing. Not every knee bows before Jesus just yet. More and more do, but not every knee. And now's the real question for us to think about, right? In light of all this, how then should we live? Prophecy means nothing if it doesn't affect the way we live our life. As we begin to think about that, think how Nebuchadnezzar responds in verses 46-49. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. And then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. At first glance, Nebuchadnezzar's response seems to be very promising, doesn't it? It's certainly good for Daniel and his friends. They're elevated to high positions. Daniel becomes a very powerful influencer in Babylon, same as Joseph did back in Egypt. Daniel's made second in command over the kingdom, and his influence is wide-ranging. In fact, many Bible scholars believe the wise men that came to visit Jesus when he was born came from this region of the world, Babylon. And they came because of the influence Daniel had over this region 600 years earlier. It all happened because God put Daniel where he wanted Daniel to be. But that's kind of just a side note. Nebuchadnezzar, notice what happens. He does pay lip service to God. Your God is the God of gods and Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries. But look who Nebuchadnezzar bows before in this passage. It says he fell prostrate before Daniel. He's worshiping Daniel, not the God of heaven, not the revealer of mysteries. He gives the revealer of mysteries lip service, but his worship is aimed toward Daniel. It looks good, but it's not a right response. He should have surrendered in that moment to God, not to Daniel, because that's the only way you can avoid your kingdom being shattered by the rock. 1 Peter 2, 7-8, Peter says, "Now to you who believe, this stone is precious, But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message. Is Christ the cornerstone of your life, or are you tripping and stumbling over him because you're disobeying the gospel? Look at your life and ask yourself, is Jesus the solid rock on which you stand? Or are you tripping all over him? Any nation, any person that's building themselves on anything other than Jesus and obedience to the word of Christ and the gospel is destined to be broken to pieces by Jesus. As a church, as a people belonging to Jesus, we must stand on him and his gospel alone. If we don't, divisions are soon going to creep in and we're going to be broken. So I want to ask you, I want you to go home and think about this. Are you truly, at this moment, standing on Jesus? The Bible is very clear. The day is going to come. He's going to rule over your life one day or another, sooner or later. Why not come to him now and willingly bow before him and be blessed by him? We all like to try to hold on to our own little kingdoms, try to surrender as little of our life as possible to Jesus, as little as we can get away with. Give him a piece, but we still try to hold on. But it won't work. We can't have that mixture. It's all or nothing with Jesus. Just like that statue couldn't survive with a base made out of a mixture of iron and clay, we can't stand with a mixture of Jesus and the wisdom of this world. Come to him today. Bow before him. Surrender every part of your life to him. Give your life fully and completely in obedience to the one who loved you and gave his life for you. Build your life on the sure foundation of his word, his love, and his grace and mercy. If you do that, your life will have meaning and purpose. If you do that, you will be part of a kingdom that is growing and will triumph and endure forever. Let's pray. Father, we come before you. And in our own way, we're very much like this statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. We look to present ourselves as something glorious, either in our thinking and our appearance, but so often our feet are made of clay, and we're on slippery ground. Father, I pray that we would surrender not just a piece of our life, not just a piece of our kingdom, but all of our life to the true King. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.